And instead of asking them in advance what would count as evidence for the existence of God, we'll keep giving the person more and more evidence, only for them to just hand wave it all away and claim that it's no evidence at all. Now, there's a few reasons for this possible miscommunication here. Let's just discuss a couple of the most common. First, they seem to think that there's only one kind of evidence.
There's only one kind of evidence. Well, if I had to pick which one that you would most likely think, that would be empirical or scientific evidence. The reason why this would be important is because this is just evidence of reality. This would be evidence that everybody could have access to. This would be independently verifiable evidence. It wouldn't be subjective, really. The scientific method has a great way of removing a lot of bias from your conclusions, if you follow it appropriately. It's even got a mechanism worked within it so that if you're ever proven wrong about something, you can go back and you can work out the actual truth of reality considering the new information. This is just how reasonable people come to conclusions about reality. Now, are there other kinds of evidence? Sure, there are philosophical arguments for God. This wouldn't necessarily be empirical or physical evidence that God exists, but really just a logical argument that leads to the conclusion that God does exist. But the problem here is that all the philosophical arguments for God seem to fail in one way or another. Just in their basic steps of their syllogisms, or however you want to present the argument, they usually entail something that is false or a leap in logic.
Okay, so for the purposes of this video, the relevant part of this meme is at the very end, where it says, if you propose the existence of something, you must follow the scientific method in your defense of its existence. Otherwise, I have no reason to listen to you.
Okay, so I really disagree with the very last part of this meme, obviously. I don't really like this kind of meme that well, of course, this is what his channel originally started out as, which was, analyzing atheist memes or analyzing memes in general, I guess. But in any case, I disagree with the very last line there. That seems really pretentious. But the first sentence there does seem to be pretty sound. If you make a claim that something does exist, or you make some kind of positive claim, then the burden of proof is upon you in order to prove it with good evidence, not faulty evidence or bad evidence or evidence that doesn't actually lead you to the conclusion that you're trying to get to. The burden of proof is essentially on you.
Now, as this meme seems to imply, it's common for people to think that the only evidence available for the existence of God should be scientific or empirical evidence. And this is probably why they see scientists as some sort of authority on religion.
Now, I'm not going to try and speak for every atheist out there, but I know at least for me, I don't look to scientists as authorities in the field of the philosophical question of whether or not God exists. But I will say that science does come into conflict with religion an awful lot, especially when you get to very specific claims of God. Like when you say, God is necessary for this universe to be here. Well, that's a question that we can definitely answer with science. And we have gotten some really good hypotheses about how the universe could have started without a God. It's just a natural process. And I've talked about this a lot on my channel. I'm sure that I've got some kind of video up here or in the comments that'll kind of help explain it to you. But essentially, it's a natural process, and this intersects with science. So it's not that we look to scientists as authorities on God. It's just that religion regularly makes scientific claims that supposedly only God can explain.
It's because their basic understanding of what counts as evidence is flawed. So first, what is scientific evidence? It's typically evidence that we can verify and measure with our senses that's interpreted by results that are testable and repeatable. But scientific evidence isn't the only type of evidence that there is. So take forensics, for example. You can't measure testable and repeatable events in order to come to a verdict. You won't always have a photo. In trial, non-empirical evidence such as testimony can have serious weight, especially if you can link it with a motive, opportunity, and a means.
Yes. True, but all of that can be overcome with physical evidence, empirical evidence. I don't care how good of a motive or how good of an anecdotal eyewitness statement you have, if it does not match the evidence at hand, then it will be tossed out. Anecdotal eyewitness evidence, in court cases especially, are considered some of the weakest forms of evidence. So while anecdotal evidence is in fact evidence, it's still just anecdotal evidence that can be overridden by the physical evidence. The reason why atheists want physical evidence is that it is the most objective that we can get. Physical evidence. Anecdotal evidence or evidence from eyewitnesses or anything like that is always going to be subjective. But physical or empirical evidence, we can actually get to some kind of objective view of the truth of reality. Considering that a lot of religious experience are very subjective to the person that is experiencing them, that's why we don't accept this anecdotal eyewitness testimony from Christian apologists like John McRae here. That's why we constantly ask for empirical evidence.
So the first thing that we have to realize is that there's different types of evidence. And second, we have to ask, what type of God are these skeptics looking for? For one reason or another, they seem to picture God as some giant man with a long gray beard who's sitting on top of a mountain waiting to be discovered. As if you were able to line up all of the objects in the world, God would just be another one waiting to be discovered by scientists.
I wonder why we think it's some bearded white dude in the sky watching us masturbate at night. Could it be because Christians all throughout time have depicted this asshole just like this? If Christian apologists want to blame anybody for the misconception that God is some bearded white dude in the sky casting magical spells on people, maybe Christian apologists should blame themselves. Because it kind of seems like that's the picture that you want us to have of this God. More to the point though, we don't have to have some direct empirical evidence of God. I don't need his cape or his toga or whatever in the fuck he might be wearing. I don't need any of that. Just like with a black hole out in space, we can't see a black hole, but what we can see are the effects of the black hole on its immediate surroundings. That's, in fact, how we detect black holes out in space, considering that light can't escape a black hole, therefore we can't see it, we could just see the effects of it. And that's what we would ideally like to see if this God were to exist. We would like to see direct, verifiable evidence that this God has an effect on our reality. So portraying atheists in a fashion that has them requiring God's toenail clippings or something like that is a straw man against the atheist position, because we don't need that. We just need verifiable evidence of the effects of God in order to show that God most likely does exist. The problem is that there is no evidence like that. Or rather, there's no good evidence that would support the conclusion that God most likely exists.
But Christianity and none of the great monotheistic religions believe in a God like this. They all believe that God is spirit. God's not understood to be another object among the other objects in the world, but instead God's meant to be the grounding of everything that exists. So in other words, he's the author of the whole show.
Yeah, I get that the Christian God is perceived in that way in some of the denominations of Christianity. But, like I said before, all we need is verifiable evidence of the effects of God. If God is the author of everything in reality, then we should definitely be able to determine that he actually is the author of everything in reality. It shouldn't just rely on one old-ass book written by people that thought the earth was flat, which that's the Old Testament. New Testament wouldn't think a flat earth necessarily, but my point is that the idea that a God exists shouldn't totally rest on a book claiming that he does.